Hello, everyone. This is the Falsifiable Podcast. I am your host, Eric Denton. And today I have with me, once again, Matt Johnson. He's a writer and editor who has worked, his work has appeared in Incoherence, The Bulwark, Quillette. He has his own Substack called Notes on Globalism, which is really good. He publishes in The Unpopulist, which is on Substack. And I think Matt is one of the writers I like to listen to because he's detail oriented. He goes at the heart of things, and he's somebody that people should listen to if you're enlightenment minded liberal. And anyway, so Matt, welcome to the podcast again.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Today we're going to get into this really quick. The craziness of the stock market this past week due to Trump's tariffs. And I wanted to see your input or overall outlook on this. I was going to actually look at the New York Times today, though, just kind of do a C-SPAN style thing here really quick, where I just look at some headlines. So the stock market, he announced these tariffs, and the stock market completely tanked. And then since then, it's been going up and down based on what he's been saying on his Truth Social site and all of this kind of stuff. And certain things have changed since then. He's put a 90-day pause on most of all these reciprocal tariffs that he had in place, I think, leaving a universal tariff of 10%. And now along with that, he upped his tariff percentage on China goods, imported goods, though, to I think 145% at this point. They retaliated. And from what I can tell, since this is a communistic government, I mean, Xi can pretty much do whatever he wants. And we saw this actually in the pandemic where he, implemented this zero tolerance or zero COVID policy, and his citizens basically just have to go along because this is a country where you just have to abide by what the government says or else. And so
Mm.
this is potentially a country you wouldn't want to have a trade war with to this extent because it can also lead to other wars, and it's just hard to face people like this. Anyways, though, all that to say, it leads me to this. Today's New York Times, this is a front page headline. Trump adds tariff exemptions for smartphones, computers, and other electronics. And this is, I think, for China. The subheadline is this: a long list of electronic products got a reprieve for now from at least some of the levies on China, which have been expected to take a toll on tech giants like Apple. What do you see going on here with China, Matt? And you see right now he's relenting because now he's got this pressure mounting. What do you see happening here, and what's your overall take so far on this?
Oh man, I mean, where to begin? I think the most galling thing about the tariff policy is the fact that it's completely incoherent. Trump is pursuing two mutually exclusive policies simultaneously. The first one is reshoring manufacturing, creating this manufacturing renaissance in the United States, forcing countries to set up shop here. And the second one is using tariffs as a bludgeon and a negotiating tool to achieve other ends, geopolitical ends, other trade agreements, what have you. You can't have both of these policies simultaneously. So if we're going to use tariffs as a negotiating tool, then companies have absolutely no incentive to build infrastructure in the United States, to make huge substantial investments required long term to do any of the things that Trump wants them to do. And if we're actually just going to impose the tariffs and keep them on, then they can't be used as negotiating tools, and countries will recognize that there's no getting out of them. There's nothing to negotiate. Like you're just gonna have to make a sort of initial deal and then the tariff. So it's just utterly incoherent, been implemented in the most slapdash way imaginable. Anybody who tells you that Trump's plan was to retreat from the tariffs after a week and implement this 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs is just an apologist, is just a complete court jester. I mean, Trump was terrified of what was happening in the bond market. And what we had were stocks tanking and bond yields surging. So basically, people were losing faith in the stock market and they were losing faith in US treasuries and US debt. So it's an utterly catastrophic policy across the board. It scared Trump to death, and that's why he backed off. This is not part of some master plan. It's not 4D chess. He's utterly incompetent. And then just to round it out with the issue of China. So one of the biggest problems with the Trump administration so far is that in his attempt to be unpredictable, in his attempt to be the sort of mercurial character who you can't follow and you can't you can't bank on, he has undermined American credibility and he's undermined deterrence, NATO deterrence, deterrence in East Asia. Like there's nobody who thinks at this point that the United States would defend one of the Baltic states if Russia made a move there. And there's really nobody who thinks the United States would take serious action against China if there were a blockade or an invasion. Trump would immediately try to strike some kind of deal with Xi Jinping. I mean, he
Mm,
just has absolutely no interest in potentially risking American blood and treasure defending Taiwan. So you layer on top of that a trade war with China and just the declaration that we're going to do all the damage we can, inflict all the damage we can economically. And I think it raises the stakes and raises the possibility of invasion of Taiwan even more. And Chinese generals have apparently said, or Xi Jinping has told the Chinese generals to be prepared to invade Taiwan by 2027. So right in the middle of Trump's second term. So yeah, what we have is just chaos, disaster on all fronts, as usual.
right. What about it's been his new policy on tariffs has been it has been what is it? Uh, it's been compared to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which was signed into law by Herbert Hoover, and I mean, that was a true failure right there. I mean, that is, it worsened the Great Depression, and you can actually just look at that. It was pretty similar to what's going on right now, and I have heard this comparison. But whenever you see things like that, how does Trump think that what he's doing now will be any different than that, and also be any different or be better than what almost every mainstream economist has to say about tariffs?
I don't know. I mean, I know that Trump has been interested in tariffs for many decades. It's one of the very few consistent positions he's held, along with his hostility to NATO. Those are probably the two most consistent political positions he's held over the years. He thinks tariffs do work. I think in his heart of hearts, he thinks they absolutely do work. He's just getting bullied out of them repeatedly. He got bullied out of them with Canada and Mexico and retreated from that policy very quickly. He retreated from this policy quickly. He's now doing the carve outs with the electronics, like you mentioned. Of course, we're not talking about removing tariffs on things that poor people buy, things that the working class buys, all the people who are supposed to be Trump's base. We're talking about carve outs for Tim Cook at Apple, as usual.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, and Peter Navarro has a huge influence on Trump's thinking. They've been aligned on tariffs for many years, and Navarro was this lone voice out in the wilderness, condemning free trade and talking about the value of tariffs for many years. And now he's in the saddle and he's enjoying every second of it.
Right.
So yeah, he really likes tariffs. So the question is, I think to Trump, it's how much can he get away with? How many tariffs can he impose? How big can they be without tanking the global economy? So he's playing this unbelievable game of chicken. And it calls to mind something that has been bothering me lately. I think people need to be more wound up about the fact that this unilateral action, this unilateral imposition of tariffs. It has to be one of the greatest exercises of power in recent American history. I mean, and it's an exercise of power that's having immediate, extremely deleterious effects on Americans. And Trump's in his arrogance is he wake up in the morning and have a tummy ache and decide to impose greater tariffs on the entire planet. Like this is just a grotesque ceding of power by Congress, and it's something that has to be reined in. But there's no sign that Congress is going to be willing to do that. We're too far out from the midterms for one thing.
It,
So anyway, yeah, it's infuriating, is what it is, to have him
mm.
nuke people's portfolios like this. And really, in the long term, he's going to inflict massive economic harm because uncertainty is the enemy of investment. It's the enemy of growth.
Mm. Yeah, there's a book written by the Nobel laureate. What's his name? He wrote a book called Noise. He wrote a book called How or Thinking Fast and Slow. Do you know who I'm talking about, Matt?
Oh yeah, Daniel Kahneman.
Daniel Kahneman, yeah. So I recently
Yeah,
listened to the book Noise, and again, the thesis of that book is every judgment call, every time we make a judgment, we humans, there's always a bunch of noise involved, no matter what. If it's a judgment. And Trump is one of these people that he has noise about, I mean, the amount of noise in this guy's head on any given day, as you say, it's like if he wakes up on one side of the bed in the morning, he'll be like, "Okay, I'm just going to destroy the world." Or if he wakes up on another side, he's like, "I think I'll go easy on destroying the world today." It's just given what he's eaten for breakfast or whatever. And the fact that Congress has ceded this much power to this guy, a guy that is this mercurial, who's not playing 3D chess. He's clearly a guy that's seen people on television that are bosses on television shows or either gangster movies like Goodfellas where he sees guys pushing each other around. He acts like those people are that are in these fictitious shows. Like he thinks that this is how you run the world. And sadly,
yeah,
much of his base thinks that that's how the world is run as well, and it's due to things like television and all. Not disparaging television, you and I are people, in the reality-based community can differentiate between what's real and what's not real. And yet Trump seems to think that he's like Mr. Spacely from the Jetsons, where he's just barking orders at people to make more sprockets, and they do make more sprockets. And it's
yeah,
just this
yeah,
weird cartoonish thing that he has. But the problem is it's having massive global economic fallout. We're disparaging our friends on a daily basis. We're propping up our enemies. And the thing is that his base doesn't seem to care, or they seem to. The more I talk to people like that I know that are Trump supporters, they will just go along with anything, and then they will sit here and defend it or justify it in any which way possible, no matter how irrational it may be. And I think this leads me into something which I've been reading a book this past week called, I actually have it right here. It's called The Death of Truth. It's by Stephen Brill, which you may know Stephen Brill's work. He did A Bitter Pill, or The Bitter Pill is about the Obamacare. Anyways, the subtitle of this book is How Social Media and the Internet Gave Snake Oil Salesmen and Demagogues the Weapons They Needed to Destroy Trust and Polarize the World, and What We Can Do. The thing about it is, I do see within the media landscape, you have all of these terrible media outlets who give misinformation, or either they'll take kernels of truth and completely distort them and just argue in these immensely bad faith ways. They have much more traffic, and this book lays this out very very nicely. They have much more traffic than sites that you and I might read, or papers that you and I might read, like the New York Times. Gateway Pundit has like a crazy amount of, like, more interaction than the Atlantic Monthly, like by far. Or it's like
yeah.
crazy statistics like that. And my thing is how in the world do we fight against this? And this leads me into, we'll get into the Douglas Murray thing with Joe Rogan recently. And Douglas Murray was not landing this point properly. But do you see a problem here? It's like, when you talk to Trump supporters, or you speak to people, do you notice that there's a line of attack that they take that they're getting from these particular very popular irresponsible outlets?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just read a piece for the Unpopulist about the free press, which
Mm,
just has to be a classic. And the free press, to me, is one of the most insidious outlets out there because it does publish plenty of decent work. I mean, it's not like the free press is some howling rag,
hmm
but it has this faux independence. How many times has Barry Wise insisted on the fierce independence of the free press? And what they do is they use that image of independence, that veneer of objectivity to essentially pump anti-Trump content to the masses. There are a lot of people out there who are certainly unsettled by the trade war. They're unsettled by Trump's moves, foreign policy wise. They don't like the man personally. They have their issues with Trump, and they'll always, you'll always get some stupid disclaimer about how well he's brash and well he's kind of crazy sometimes, and I don't like the tweets but they really hate wokeness. That is their lodestar. That's the thing they're obsessed with. And they generally do just hate the left. I mean, they think that, Biden being fogged in the head is a much bigger scandal than Trump trying to overthrow American democracy. And don't get me wrong, I think Biden being fogged in the head was a big scandal. I think people should have listened to Ezra Klein and other people who were warning about that earlier on. I furious with Biden for staying in as long as he did. But it's truly laughable to put it anywhere close to
Hmm.
1% of what Trump's done. 1%. I mean, it's just like it's just this. So I really do think that the popularity of an outlet like the Free Press that has a very clear ideological agenda, and yet claims to be doing the exact opposite, claims to be nonpartisan, claims to be independent. I think it's really dangerous. And the Free Press, in many ways, is one of the more defensible actors in this space because I just have a political problem with them.
Mm.
I do take issue with some of their reporting. Um, Coleman Hughes wrote an article about the fall of Minneapolis, that documentary about Chauvin and Floyd that had some problems, and like there were problems with their journalistic approach, but it's nothing like Joe Rogan. I mean, Joe Rogan will just spout falsehoods with his guests for many hours on end. I
Mm.
mean, he has people who really have no business talking about geopolitics or history or what have you on a show to hold forth for 3 hours straight. I mean, a great example would be RFK Jr.'s appearance on Rogan's podcast. And at the very beginning of the podcast, Rogan said, the one thing I'm going to do in this conversation is stand back and just let you go. I'm not because there are too many people who push back against you, Bobby. So I'm just gonna put a quarter in the machine and let it rip. And
Right.
that's it's just and so then you just get 3 hours of undiluted anti-vax lunacy. And he says things like Wi-Fi causes cancer in this interview with Rogan. So
Right.
I mean that sort of thing does make the Free Press look considerably better. Although the Free Press did publish an article by Vinay Prasad about RFK Jr., which completely sanewashed him. Said he was going to engage with all of his most controversial positions and proceeded to engage with pretty much none of his controversial positions. Like it didn't
Hmm.
say anything about RFK Jr.'s claim that the unvaccinated during the pandemic had less freedom than the Jews during the Holocaust, for example.
Oh
Didn't
yeah,
say anything
yeah.
about the claims about Wi-Fi and cancer. I could go on and on. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. None of those details found their way into Prasad's article, and that was in the Free Press. So, yeah, sometimes they really do swing and miss too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay, so there you go. So we've covered a couple things here. We went from trade policy to the noise and that's interacting with Trump's judgment calls on a daily basis to the insidiousness of the free press. And I think you're exactly right to point this out because Gateway Pundit and all the ones that I just pointed out, those are clearly like to any sane people, even people that know better, or excuse me, even people that are in Trump's orbit know that when they're reading the gate, they have to know. They're not this dumb.
Sure.
They know that it's just pure propaganda for the Trump
Well, I don't think the
outlets and
Daily
Trump.
Wire hides the fact that it's
Yeah,
conservative publication.
right,
Fox News does not hide the fact that they're pro-Trump.
right.
But free press hides the ball. I find that infinitely galling. It might
That
seem like kind of a funny thing to obsess over, but it's just that they repeat this claim at such a high decibel level
I
so
think.
relentlessly. Every editorial says, like they had an editorial before the election and said something like, "Oh, you our brilliant readers come to this outlet because they don't want to be told how to think. They want to think for themselves." And it's just give
Right.
it a rest. This is obviously just false. I just to put one fine point on it. I'm sorry, this is a little bit longer of a speech than I thought it was going to be. I did read every single article in the U.S. politics section of the Free Press from between I think it was May to November, 2024. So I
Mm.
read pretty much all their coverage leading up to the election, and that was when they really kind of had to weigh in for one candidate or the other. It was overwhelmingly pro-Trump. Overwhelmingly. The numbers I
Right.
came to were something like 70 pro-Trump or anti-Harris slash Biden articles and something like 14 that were pro-Democrat and anti-Trump. But honestly, that understates the case because I had tons that I coded as neutral, which were obviously they were right-wing valenced, but they just weren't like explicitly political. They weren't really talking about Trump. They were talking about campus protests or trans issues or what have you. So
Mm.
anyway, it's a right-wing magazine.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which, like as you say, it's veiled as this like free thinking. This is Barry Weiss is always like, this is a home for the politically homeless and all this kind of stuff. So come to us for your needs or whatever. I'm like,
Yep.
okay, enough with this. This is stupid. But also, and they don't hit hard.
Heterodox.
That yeah, heterodox. This is the new word. Everybody wants to be heterodox, which I actually do think heterodoxy is a great thing. But when you're using that word as a to cover what you're actually up to, that's insidious, as you say. So invidious as well. So here you go, Douglas Murray on this Joe Rogan podcast. So I listened to this at double speed and I re-listened to the beginning, the first like 20 minutes, just because Douglas comes out and I'm like, okay, here we go. Murray is finally going to swing hard. And I love the uncomfortability of it. I think it's great. He just gets in the face right off the bat. But then he seems to start dropping the ball pretty quickly, and he has a hard
He
time
did on quite
recovering.
a few issues,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah, it was no, you go. Sorry.
the only reason I'm saying this is because like I was waiting for him to that scorched earth that he does against woke and all. He just hasn't calibrated that. And this is actually because he hasn't written a lot on it. And this is what happens when you only write about the other side and you don't write about your own side ever. And now you can't argue properly whenever you're put in a situation like this. He is smart enough to have uh, completely demolished Dave Smith, I mean, of all people. And yet I felt as if like as the conversation wore on, I had this idea that Rogan Smith fans were like, yeah, I mean, yeah, put this elitist whatever back, to rest. Like, what does he think he is? We're not allowed to have opinions, and they took that line. And my thing is that Douglas wasn't saying that you're not allowed to have opinions or share opinions whenever you're a non-expert. He never landed this point properly, though, as far as I could tell. He was trying to get the point across that when you have an outlet as big as these guys, include especially Rogan, you need to start being far more responsible with how you put information out into the world, especially when you do 3 hour podcasts a day. You and I know just to do, as you just said, you read every article leading up from May till the election, pretty much on like domestic stuff leading up to the Trump election. This is what you have to do when you're a journalist. You have to like it takes countless hours and you have to trudge through terrible things and to get even little minor details right. And when you're doing an 3 hour podcast like twice a day, there's just simply no way you're going to be able to tackle these things in this sort of way. And you're going to end up putting out bad information because you're not going to be able to counter the people that are on your show. And then you're gonna, you go to Wikipedia, and we have a bunch of debaters nowadays on YouTube that they use Wikipedia and they use AI to get their facts. But the problem is historians have a lot of background information. And whenever you take things out of context, like when in that conversation with Douglas Murray and Joe Rogan and Dave Smith, they were talking about that guy that was basically, he was making Churchill seem like the bad guy, and he it sort of elevated Hitler a smidge. Um, like that if you have these like little things about Churchill that might have been errors, but then like people that are idiosyncratic about it, that aren't historians, that have are bad faith actors in the sense that they're going to gain a lot of followers and money because of this newfound knowledge, this hidden history that they have. They'll exploit that, and it's so anyways, I said that's my preamble to into what you want to say about
No, it was perfect.
Douglas. Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're pretty aligned. I mean, on the Daryl Cooper issue, and that's what they began with.
right.
Murray was calling Rogan out for having him on and having other people like this guy named Ian Carroll on to talk about history, and he just kept saying they're not historians, they're not spending any time in the archives, they're not, which is all true. But the problem is he just wasn't like, I don't think he's familiar enough with Daryl Cooper's work to go after him properly, and I'm not
Right.
either, unfortunately. But the thing is, you have context. Daryl Cooper posted a picture of the Nazis Adolf Hitler standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, after the successful invasion of France. And he juxtaposed it with a picture of like a bunch of LGBTQ plus people during the Olympics, and I think you can see the Eiffel Tower in the background there too. And it was like this, they had some pageantry that people found really obnoxious. A lot of people on the right found the Olympics just like too woke or whatever, and said, I infinitely prefer the picture on the left to the one on the right. So that I prefer the Nazis to the woke stuff. And
Right.
I think he might have gone on and deleted that. And then of course you get, Dave Smith and Rogan would guffaw and they'd sit back and they'd giggle and they'd say he's just joking and you don't get it. And that was a moment for Douglas Murray to look at them, I mean, stone cold and say, I think it's absolutely disgusting what this man is trafficking in. I think it's
Mm.
revolting. I mean, if you've read the first thing, I mean, I just read both of Timothy Snyder's books, Black Earth and Bloodlands. If you have paid any attention to any historical literature on the Holocaust, that's not cute. It's not fun. You're not trolling anybody. Like this is it's revolting because he knows what his followers are saying. You can just look at the comments to his articles or to his posts on X. There's endless anti-Semitism. There's a gusher of anti-Semitism. This man knows what he's doing. When he goes
Mm.
on Tucker Carlson's show, and when Tucker Carlson engages with Candace Owens, and they start talking about how Israel's blowing up churches intentionally, they're feeding something extremely ugly.
Mm.
And I can't believe that Murray, of all people, couldn't really like get up in arms, like use this high dudgeon sort of sanctimonious language that he's capable of summoning so well, and really like stick it to these guys. And instead, he just kind of says, "But he's not a historian. Why are you having historians on?" And then he does like impute potentially anti-Semitic motives to these people, and he like kind of says these things and he dances around the issue. But like just that one Twitter thing, that one post, which I don't follow Daryl Cooper, I don't care about this guy.
Right.
He's just like I try to read actual historians. I mean, I read Snyder,
Right.
but like just that one thing to me, he could have just written one thing, that one post, and that would have been enough.
Mm.
But it's just you just have to if you're going to make this argument, you have to make it well. That's the first thing. The second thing is don't be a credentialist. Don't sit there and say because earlier when I said that Rogan has people on the show who have no business being on the show, I'm not saying that because they don't have PhDs. I'm not saying that because they haven't written major history books or contributed to the academic literature. I'm not a PhD in international relations, and I talk about international relations all the time. Socrates did not have a PhD in philosophy. That is not me
Right.
comparing myself to Socrates, obviously. But George Orwell didn't have a journalism degree. He didn't go to university.
Right.
Like we don't. He shouldn't. He really did sound like a credentialist in this conversation.
Mm.
And he
Which,
really like the line about like how Dave Smith hasn't been to Israel. He hasn't been to the border crossing with Egypt. Egypt into Gaza and all these. And he really really rode this hard, and people have been ripping him for it. I mean, I think he's got a good point. Like if you're foreign correspondents have a view of a place that nobody else has. Like I mentioned that documentary about Mariupol last time I was on your show. Like
right.
like if you actually go to Ukraine and you speak to Ukrainians, then of course you have a certain authority that somebody who's never been there has. Like you kind of get a sense for the place. You kind of know what it's like when the air raid sirens go off. But at the same time, to say that you have to travel to all of the countries you comment on, which is a point that Murray made in the conversation, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. Like it's a dodge. Like you
Right.
should just engage with the arguments themselves. Dave Smith could have spent his entire life in Joe Rogan's studio. He could have been born there and spent the last few decades there. And if he's making good points, he's making good points. You have to just engage with the arguments. Don't
Right.
like, and that's the particular environment where you never want to do that because
Mm.
these guys are all about doing your own research. They're all about just what they regard as, factual and logical takes when in reality, the reason why I said Rogan has people on the show who have no business in front of a mic is because they actually say stupid things
Right.
endlessly. They say
Right.
stupid things.
Right. Yeah,
I
and
mean, I just
the
mentioned RFK. He said Wi-Fi causes cancer on Rogan's show. You know,
right.
he
Yeah.
has no business talking about these sorts of things because he's a moron and he's wrong.
Right. Yeah, and I
God,
mean
it was frustrating for that reason.
exactly. Yeah, and Douglas, I think that I know he left that studio because you and I I've done podcasts before where I literally like cut it off and I was like, oh crap. I was like that wasn't I didn't land this plane like properly. And we've all done it before, but he knowing that that is the biggest podcast on the planet, I think you're right to say that he wasn't and not, he should have been at least a little bit versed in Daryl Cooper to at least have a few things to say against what Dave Smith was saying, because Dave Smith, this is the world he lives in. And this is what he and Rogan like they take in on like a daily basis. But the problem is, it's kind of like so that's my criticism of Douglas on this point. But on their end of the thing, they will take in these alternative narratives like this, these narratives that are against the prevailing narrative, or the narratives against the prevailing truth as far as we know it, and they will never have engaged in the actual truth in the first place. And it's kind of like if you're a musician and you try to this band Wilco, which I love, and they put out this album, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, like in 2000, or it was maybe been late 90s or whatever. But that album is so deconstructed, and it's just like all those weird noises and all, but there is music in it. And if a person that's not well versed in how to make music, they think you just go in with the deconstruction thing, and that they're like, oh yeah, you just make weird noises and sounds and all, and you just go with the deconstruction first. No, that's not the thing. You have to know how to first make music. And my analogy is that you have to first know what the facts are, the real history, and then you can perhaps go and look at some of these alternative narratives and see if anything adds up. And maybe there's an explanation in there that makes a little more sense and might fit the facts better. I'm not saying that nobody's perfect. Historians aren't perfect. We found things like that. But to only have uh, and also, let me say this though, I'm also not saying that you have to go look at these crazy historians either. That's unless you have a problem, like this is actually what Popper would say. Like when you come upon a problem where there's some sort of discrepancy within your theory and what you're seeing in reality, or discrepancy between theories, then you hunt that, but you don't just ask questions. That does nothing for a person. That's arbitrary. And only when you're asking questions, just asking questions, as they say on a massive podcast like Rogan, it tends to confuse a lot of people that just simply come for Rogan to be entertained or hear like his counter take on things or his guest counter take. But they end up walking away from that, and they'll tell their friends. Because I've been in conversations with people all the time that say, oh man, colloidal or whatever, it's silver is a real like thing that can help you. And I heard it on this podcast, or I'm like, what? Like, what? And then I have to. It forces me as a person that really cares about truth to have to go search all this nonsense about. I think it's called colloidal silver. You might not even. I don't know if
Mm.
you've heard of this, but it's like these conspiracies, I guess, and
My
how.
cupboard is not stocked with it.
Yeah. So, anyways, it's very frustrating, and the problem is like these type of podcasts and all force people like myself to have to counter it, and it actually is sort of an opportunity cost, because I'm like, oh, now I'm gonna have to listen to Daryl Cooper probably at some point, at least one thing, so I can, not that I even want to, but just to counter what he's up to. And not that I'm gonna do that, but
Yeah, I
people, it's very frustrating.
I'm not
What do
sure
you?
if that's even. It's not even that I think that, Murray's problem was that he hadn't inhaled 5 hours of Daryl Cooper content before going on the show. It's just that there was such low-hanging fruit. And like that story about the Olympics and about the picture of the Nazis was just so popular for a while. And
Right.
the other problem I found with his approach was the fact that because he recognizes how the right has shifted. I mean, I think Douglas Murray knows where his audience is at. I think he actually still has the same neocon inclinations that he's always had. I mean, he wrote a book called Neoconservatism: Why We Need It,
Right.
in the mid
Yeah.
aughts. But when just the post 9/11 American wars came up, Douglas he just knuckled under so quickly. I
Mm.
mean, he just didn't even like it was Dave Smith just saying, "Oh, we were just lied into a bunch of pointless conflicts, bunch of unbelievably wasteful, disgusting wars that caused all this devastation." And yeah, it's true. They were extremely destructive. It's true that, and I wrote this in my book, like the Iraq War probably set the project of trying to build a coherent, functional international community back many decades, because it was the United States ultimately not abiding by the Security Council. We didn't get Security Council authorization for the war. It broke NATO, it split NATO. There were NATO members that didn't want to be involved, so that was a big problem. Whereas Afghanistan, you had Article 5 invoked for the first and only time. Our allies came to our defense, and it was eminently justifiable. And they stayed on Afghanistan for 2 seconds. And Smith started talking about how he had talked to people who were on the ground that are Green Berets, he said, who told him that like the Afghan National Army couldn't stand up to any real resistance, and the second we left, the army would collapse. So he's basically just saying like this was just all a fool's errand. It was all a joke. It's very easy for people to forget that after 9/11, the support for the invasion of Afghanistan was off the charts in the United States. I mean, it was in the 90s percentages.
Yeah.
There was no dissent from many. There were a couple of Democrats here and there. There were people like Ron Paul who didn't want to do it, but for the most part, and to be perfectly honest, it was justified.
Mm.
This government had harbored an organization that just massacred 3,000 civilians on our soil.
Right.
So we went in there to dislodge them. And the problem is, the second you do that, you are immediately confronted with the central dilemma of the war, which is what happens after. Now we've gotten rid of the Taliban. What happens if we leave? Well, the Taliban will come back to power. And it was something that American policymakers rightly recognized as a risk and a danger. And, there's this idea that nothing good ever happened in Afghanistan the entire time we were there. Maternal mortality collapsed. Women were educated at a rate that was thousands of times higher than before. There ended up being women journalists and members of parliament, and like I think one of the stats, and before the Taliban takeover, was that the proportion of women to men in parliament was roughly comparable to the United States, maybe a little bit better. I mean, that's
Mm.
that's pretty mind-blowing for
Yeah.
Afghanistan. And I know that people just look at it with the utmost cynicism. And I'm not saying that you have to come out full bore in defense of the post 9/11 wars, but God, Murray, this guy who wrote a book about neoconservatism, is it just because he's on the populist right now? Is it just because he stands up for Ukraine? I mean, he says that we should be supporting Ukraine. He actually did call Trump out for adopting the wrong policy on that front. Like he still has these sort of neocon tendencies. But yeah, he just couldn't muster even like the shadow of an argument.
Mm.
And just to give you one more example, Libya came up, and Libya has long been a sort of hobby horse of mine, just because they take the same formula, the same critique, the sort of anti-imperialist leftists like Glenn Greenwald or people like Dave Smith, and they say, oh, yet again, the United States pursued regime change in a country, and then look at the result. Libya went through many years of civil war. That is just a completely botched, confused timeline. The civil war was already underway.
Mm.
There was already a civil war raging in Libya. The Obama administration was worried about a massacre in Benghazi. So,
Mm.
got together with our partners. Bernie Sanders was somebody who was like, he like co-sponsored, the bill in the Senate, authorizing action in Libya. And the original remit was, yeah, just to protect civilians. And then Gaddafi ended up falling. And then, yeah, you had years of civil war. But is somebody arguing to me that it would have been better if we wouldn't have intervened? Like do they have that counterfactual firmly fixed in their minds? Like, do they think that Libya would be some paradise, some paragon of stability if the
Mm.
United States hadn't protected civilians and facilitated the overthrow of Gaddafi even more quickly? I mean, Gaddafi could have maybe retained power for a little bit longer, massacred many more people in reprisal killings, and then been overthrown anyway. It's
Mm.
just this assumption that the United States is, and this is a point that Douglas Murray did make, the assumption that the United States is always the prime mover, always the only agent, always the thing responsible for all the chaos. I mean, in this case, it's just not true. It's just not
Right.
true,
Right.
like so it just. But Murray just wasn't bringing many of those arguments to bear. He was a little bit better on Syria, I will say, but I've gone on long enough.
Oh no, and yeah, I think you're right to point that out. And actually, again, this is why you, Matt, they need to have some sort of counter like this because you're deep in the weeds and all this stuff. And I know this just because I have read this book for anybody who doesn't have it, the How Hitchens Can Save the Left. This book is highly gets deep in the weeds about Iraq and everything, and it's very impressive to look at it from afar and what you've done there. But this is what he needs on his show. Joe Rogan needs somebody like you, and not to say, as you say earlier, you're not a historian and you don't have a PhD in this, but you can at least counter these things from and and put up this defense uh, from a place of non-authority, and a place of a person that just is deeply interested in this thing, similar to Dave Smith. I'm not comparing you to Dave. You're actually a journalist, but like Dave Smith, he can have that dodge, which is, I'm just a comedian. What do I know? This is just my hobby. And, he can always take that exit. Whereas you or Douglas Murray, if you flub or you say something, you're gonna have to do some explaining. It's like, and that's the
Well, I will say one thing that occurs to me, and it's to do with just yeah, it's to do with the mindset of people like Joe Rogan. Maybe less so Dave Smith because I haven't listened to enough of his content.
mm,
But if I ever said something that was just manifestly untrue, in front of millions of people. I think one example was when they were talking about the fires in LA. Joe Rogan was complaining about how they hadn't drawn upon some lake in Central California, and I think
yeah,
this lake is like it's like tens of thousands of years old, like it like existed like in prehistoric times or something.
right,
And it was just one of those. A friend of mine who knows he lived in California for a few years, and he just kind of like looked into this. He's like, "Wait, what lake is he talking about?" And then it was something cartoonishly bad like that. I'll
right,
send you the
right.
details when we get off the call. But it's just like one thing like that. I mean, I've gotten things wrong before, of course. And whenever I get things wrong, it really, really bothers me. It really bothers me. I've never been bothered by a critique of my politics in my entire life. I can't think of a time because I mean, I publish articles for Quillette, which are very globalist.
Mhm.
They're very anti-Trump, and that frequently gets just a hail of abuse. A
Oh yeah.
torrent of abuse in the comments section. And I'm not to say that Quillette's readers are like manifestly pro-Trump or anything, because they're not. But yeah, they don't share my love for globalism. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't bother me at all. Not at
Mm,
all. But if ever I were to get a fact wrong and then that was to blow up and get some more attention, that bothers me because that's just something it's objectively true. You have to just own it. You have to say, I'm sorry, I messed this up. Let's, you know, um, you can all remember this and hold it against me if you want to, but I'm prepared to move on and accept responsibility. You just don't get that from these people. That's what's
mm.
so frustrating to me.
Well,
You know what I
and
mean? I mean, the Free Press never admitted like that some of the things in Coleman Hughes's article about the fall of Minneapolis they just they didn't get it right, you know.
mm,
Um, and that's to me much more unforgivable than the mistake in the first place or than adopting some political view that I find repellent.
right.
Yeah,
Oh, I was gonna
I
say.
don't know. Like I'm
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, man. I'm sorry, man. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem at all. I was just gonna say, like, if you actually read a good portion of the real Anthony Fauci, which is
Oh yeah,
RFKjr's
I have.
masterpiece, it's simply unbelievable what this
Mm-hmm.
man believes. I mean, he actually thinks that there was an operation that was being held before COVID that just eerily predicted the number of people who would die and all these things. He basically argues that it was a pandemic, and that it actually did effectively destroy the Constitution. It effectively implemented. He called it a palace coup. I mean, he says that the United States is now this totalitarian surveillance state post COVID. I mean, this stuff that this man said is beyond insane. And the fact that so
Right.
many people are willing to accept him as just sort of a reasonable dissenting voice, like Vinay Prasad's article, I mean, that would haunt me for the rest of my life if I wrote that. It would haunt me forever because he wrote it at a time when, RFK hadn't even been confirmed. Like
Mm,
it's like you're putting your thumb on the scale here, you know? And the Free Press published all its pro-Trump stuff during the election. And
right.
now they're actually criticizing Trump a little bit more. I've noticed some commenters in my Unpopulist article pointed this out, and they're right. I've noticed that. They've been a
Mm,
little harder on him about Ukraine. They're harder on him about some of the deportations. Um,
mm,
yeah, but when they had a 50 when they had two different options, they went with one,
mm-hmm.
and it was the uglier option. It was the less defensible option.
It
So
was
anyway,
the yeah, and as far as I could tell, it was a money grab because, as I said earlier, Gateway Pundit in places like this, these pro-Trump leaning outlets get more traction. I mean, it's just the facts. That is an actual fact that you can make more money peddling, misinformation than regular information because misinformation is more outrageous, salacious, whatever you want to say, and it's just the facts on the ground. This is why journalists that are doing good work, I just admire because they're sticking to they're making less money trying to give the truth than, and it's just this is a sad state of affairs that we're in as far as all this
that is
goes.
actually you had mentioned earlier, like how do you? I mean, how do you fight this fire hose of false information and just this utter unscrupulousness of people like Rogan? There is no alternative. You just have to just do the dirty work of journalism. You just have to,
Right.
yeah, you have to dig through the real Anthony Fauci. That's, and by the way, that's not, I don't even consider myself a journalist. I consider myself an essayist or a writer.
Mm,
Like journalists are people who, actually cultivate sources, are people who actually dive into archives, or people who put on a flak jacket, and walk around on the front lines of the, battleground in Ukraine. Like those, to me, those are real journalists. I'm just a commentator. I'm a pundit, you
right.
know. I'm a pundit who's more scrupulous than Joe Rogan. I mean, I'll
Oh
say
yeah.
that much.
Oh no, no, no. And
Um,
no, much more scrupulous. Again, like the thing about it is whenever I'm reading a book and all I do with my spare time is read. And or I read articles or I love essays. Essays are like, and I think you're probably like this too. I love essays. I just love them. And I'm sort of addicted to reading essays in magazines or whether it's like the New Yorker or like the Atlantic or even Quillette or
yeah, yeah,
anything you write. I always enjoy. I just like those long forms. But again, like I do think that what I like about certain essays is that I can tell that the work was done. And I can tell because they're having to put everything in there. That's even the stuff that's killing their argument, they add in as well. And that's how I know. I'm like, this person is they don't even because I've written essays too, and there's some facts that you come across that are just gonna kill my argument. Not kill it, but they're problematic, let's say. So now I have to
yeah,
figure out how I can convey that the truth of the matter or my argument is still better than this inconvenient fact. But I'm not going to leave the inconvenient fact out because I don't want to seem like I'm lying or I don't want to seem unscrupulous. And I know you do that as well because I try to do that. So whenever I see it in other writers, I'm like, this is great because this is it makes me buzz in a way whenever I see people just digging and getting, digging deep. Okay, so all of that to say, before we go, we've gone a little over our time here, but I wanted to just hear you comment on this if you've heard it. Speaking of Douglas's talk with Dave Smith and Joe Rogan, have you ever watched the? I'm gonna compare it to this other thing that I saw. Have you ever watched Christopher Hitchens talk to John Metzger on Talk Live? Have you seen this
hell yeah,
video? That
absolutely.
that is an incredible piece of how to just backhand somebody verbally. I mean,
Yeah,
he
it was
is.
extraordinary. Yeah, yeah, that's. I mean, I do like that aspect of Hitchens's over for anyone who's wondering. This is an actual like Klansman or an actual white supremacist.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, Yeah, yeah, he did perform really well in that. Hitchens usually, and I think he was actually pretty accustomed to talking to people whose ideas were seen as beyond the pale by like your good old fashioned sort of milquetoast liberals. Like Hitchens debated with Pat Buchanan all the time, actually.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's interesting because I always viewed Hitchens' disagreement with Pat Buchanan as kind of a perfect proxy for my disagreement with many of the sort of national conservatives
Mm.
today.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I do like Hitch definitely had a big role in forming my initial interest in that kind of- and yeah, Pat Buchanan just America first, or I mean, he used the term America first. Obviously, Lindbergh used it, so it's got a long history in the United States. But yeah, it's remarkable. Like there's a great, since you like long magazine articles, long
Hmm.
essays, you should read the one in Politico about Pat Buchanan. I think maybe if you just type in like in quotations, the ideas made it, but I didn't. Politico, it should come up.
Yeah. Is it? Wait a minute. Who wrote
Um,
it?
I can't remember who wrote it. It was in Politico magazine.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's just a great piece about like there are some pictures from Buchanan's house, and I think this guy interviewed him, and it gives you a nice glimpse into the mind of a person who, I mean, Pat Buchanan, Tucker Carlson called him a genius.
Oh
Like a lot
God.
of people on the populist right really deify this guy, and Pat Buchanan's actually one of those people that's like genuinely smart. I mean, he's a smart essayist. He's an effective writer in many ways, and like I
Hmm.
think he's a lot smarter than Tucker Carlson.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, but it's funny because he did just go down this road where he actually just ended up becoming anti-American. There's really no other way to describe it, Like
Right.
he has I remember an article he wrote in like 2018 about how you just look at our completely our debauched culture and you look at abortion and you look at, the number of the divorce rate and all these things. And he's just like, it's no wonder that Iran calls us the Great Satan. Yeah, and this is where you end up. If you go down the Tucker Carlson road, if you go down the road of the populist authoritarian right, you always end up just hating the country.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you look at everything through the, again, anti-Popperian, the Platonic, who should rule is your number one question rather than how do we support our institutions and how do we make institutions where terrible leaders, because there's always going to come along, everybody's fallible. How are we going to make it where these institutions can keep these leaders from doing immense damage?
Yeah.
We obviously want them to lead and be able to take us through certain conflicts or adversities, but we don't want it. We don't want them to do too much damage in the meantime while they're trying to do that. So yeah, and Pat Buchanan, I think William Buckley actually did a national review. I think National Review at one point came out against him, and that was sort of like the straw that I mean, that's a to me I always like whenever the opposing team not a that using team and stuff is a weird way to put it, but just for the sake of this conversation, I like to see the opposing team, like the National Review readers and all, come out against craziness, because then I'm like, oh, okay, good, that does still exist, that people still they do care about like anti-Semitic talk and rhetoric, or there is a and again, like this is part of the problem of Rogan. It's like he doesn't have enough people on his podcast that are pro Ukraine, or on the Israeli side, or whatever the case may be. It's and yet he's known or looked upon as this like fount of moderation, or this fount of like unbiased information, or like he's a truth seeker, and like all the people that come on the show are just truth seekers and they're just asking questions. But again, yeah, I'm glad that as far as essays and stuff go, I like to see people come out against people. So in that respect, to say something very nice about Douglas, I was at the very least I was glad that he came out against it, even though he didn't necessarily stand up to scrutiny as good as he could have and as good as he's capable of.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is kind of I do feel a little guilty about armchair quarterbacking this whole thing just because you don't really know how a conversation is going to unfold. And, I actually, yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because it's weird of me. I feel weird about getting on Murray's case because he actually did something I didn't expect him to do. I didn't expect him to go that hard at Rogan. I didn't expect him to really like take this whole format to task, this just asking questions routine, this like we're going to have a comedian on who's going to say some irresponsible things, but then we can just like retreat to the comfortable claim that he's a comedian. Who cares? Like he really did what many more people should be doing, and
Hmm.
he was in there. I mean, he's in the thick of it. He debated this guy for a few hours, and Joe Rogan was obviously on Dave Smith's side, everything. I'm sure that doesn't help when you have a moderator and he just kind of seems to like at every available opportunity be like, oh, Douglas, that's not fair. Oh, you don't understand. I've listened to tens of hours of Daryl Cooper content, and this guy is actually just eminently reasonable.
Mm.
So yeah, I thought Murray actually he did, and he did land plenty of great points. It's not that I think it was just devoid of quality content.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean he made a lot of I think he corrected a lot of Dave Smith's sort of oversimplifications on Israel, although I do think that Murray's also fairly unwilling to look at a more critical Israel's behavior through a more critical lens.
Mm. Hmm.
So yeah, on the whole, I wish it would have been executed a little bit better, just because it's gotten a strange amount of attention, and it's kind of being pitched as this like classic elite versus everyman debate, and like it's just been blown up into something that it probably doesn't deserve to be.
Mm.
But for that reason, I just wish he would have gone after him a little harder. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And you keep actually, it's funny that we're talking about this because my my thought on it is continuously shifted. And the reason it is, I actually think it is the reason it is such a big thing. Again, how I don't watch Rogan, I don't listen to Rogan, like unless he has, like if Steve Pinker or somebody like that goes on, I might listen, for a little while, or somebody that's like, that I know is going to be reasonable or whatever. I don't just listen to like it'll be like, oh, ex-combat fighter talks about blah blah, or like or UFC fighter says yada. I don't. None of this interests me. I mean, I'm not saying that it's bad content or whatever, but it's simply not interesting to me. But
Yeah.
yeah. So like I think that what was I going to say? There was one final point I was going to make on this. To round off what I was saying though about Murray, I think you are right to say that, and I agree that I may have said it already, but I am glad that he did at least come out against it. I think it's getting this much attention because nobody of this caliber, because Douglas has built himself up over the past couple of years as a very like a well-known person. I remember following Douglas way back in the day where he was just like a
Hmm.
not known at all. And I found him interesting because I've always been in opposition to radical Islam or Islamism as people as it's called. And he always made extremely sound points, and his arguments were just so fun to watch against, religious fundamentalists as far as that goes. But over the time, he's built himself up into like a heavy hitting right winger, in particular on the woke front. But again, he hasn't calibrated his argumentative style against his own side. I mean, he just simply hasn't written a lot about it. Like you said, he said something, he did put something out about how Trump is, you know, uh, losing the plot on the whole Ukraine thing, or lost the plot. And um, but that's, other than that, it's still like it's not much. So again, that he needs to, oil that machine a little bit as far as his criticism on these like pure like fascistic tendencies that are coming from his side of the aisle. So um anyways, I'm trying to think, is that all? Did you have anything else that you wanted to cover or say, Matt?
No, just I guess to put a finer point on the Murray thing. Yeah, he's I think what's interesting is that he has this reputation for being a very brutal debater, so it's when it goes like that, when it's kind of flat, I think people are like more inclined to sort of pounce.
Mm.
Um even when he does criticize Trump for Ukraine, like I remember reading an article, I think it was in The Spectator. He started by mentioning Hunter Biden. Like his first paragraph
Right.
has to be, it's just like he's doing the exact same thing as the free press. Like, it's just, I'm really, really tired. I've really grown impatient with this idea that every time I attack Trump, I really need to like weave in a critique of wokeness as well.
Mm.
It's just not the primary threat right now. It's just simply not. A bigger threat is Trump's exploitation of wokeness as an issue.
Mm.
You know,
Right. Yes.
um,
Yeah, you're good. Good point.
and a good way to wind up is to say, I was actually struggling to think of some examples of Rogan doing sort of what we're criticizing him for. Look at his Brett Weinstein conversation. I mean, this is
Mm.
one that I've written about. I wrote about it in the Unpopulist. I mean, this is a guy who was saying things like COVID might be this weapon engineered by the Chinese, to like make people more servile in the United States, and then they like kicked all the soldiers who like wouldn't take the jab out of the military, and then maybe the ones who are remaining are the ones who've been like infected, and then they
Oh
might turn
yeah.
their guns on Americans. Or he said there was an invasion coming up from Central America. I mean, this is ludicrous. And Rogan just sat there and said, "What? No, crazy." Like it was just. And then there was Rogan's conversation with Trump, and he said for years he wasn't going to talk to Trump. He said he didn't want to help him, and I predicted months beforehand that he would have Trump on, and it would be a fawning softball interview, and of course, it proved. And
Yeah.
that's just how he was. And this, like, to me, man, like if you'd had Kamala Harris on there, he would have been a lot harder of an interviewer. I just think we've got to call out people who have an ideological agenda when they say they don't, because
Mm.
this idea of heterodoxy, which has really taken hold among a lot of thinkers, the brothers Weinstein, Obviously, Rogan and many of his followers, they've got to drop it. At least Douglas Murray just says, I'm right wing. I mean, he's never made any bones about that, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. To
I'm not going to
his
call him out for just being what he is, you know?
Yeah, to his credit. And final thing. And that actually is a good way to sum it up. But I was reading something that I think that people should look into though is read about tariffs, read about trade policy. I've been reading going into the deep dive, the weeds of John Maynard Keynes, and I've been going in. I read Capitalism and Freedom. Or listened to Capitalism Freedom this past week. A couple of some of those chapters I had to re-listen to because again, I'm not a guy that knows a whole bunch about economics, but these are two opposing forces. So just to hear what people have to say about trade, I mean, instead of just going along to get along, if you're wondering what this stuff has the potential of doing, which I think, imposing these gigantic reciprocal trades just up and down, left and right with just complete abandon, I think is detrimental to the global economy. I mean, it's just been demonstrated to be the case that will happen or can happen. And if you are even going to impose tariffs, which actually I'm almost on the side of, again, having been reading a lot about it, I'm being more and more convinced that tariffs in general are just a blunt instrument, maybe too blunt almost at nearly all times, because it just it tends to harm everybody across the board, and it protects like even if manufacturing comes home, they're not incentivized anymore to do good work because now then you're going to have low more expensive goods and because it's being made here and maybe potentially by unions and stuff like that, or but because they're not competing with the world, they're just not as good of goods. I mean, there's just so many things. The economy's like
Hmm.
freaking whack-a-mole, and it's like anytime you change something here, something gets jacked up over here, and so that's my pitch is that people, if you have any time, look into some of these, get into the weeds a little bit about economic policy and everything else, and just see what some of the Adam Smith has to say, see what any of these people had to say back in the day up until now. I don't know. Have you read any of that though? Just in since all this has been going
Yeah, I
on.
mean, I've just been I've been very pro free trade for many years. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
when I was working at a daily paper in 2017, or what would that have been? 2016. I was writing articles in favor of TPP. I actually had a
Mm.
conversation with the U.S. Trade Representative about it. Um, yeah, it was interesting. But Mike,
Yeah.
what was his name? Michael Homan at the time. Anyway, yeah, I've just always seen the value of it. I think the costs can be mitigated and managed. I mean, one thing to bear in mind is the United States just isn't going to be a manufacturing powerhouse like it was. There's just no economically viable path toward that future. I mean, the amount of productivity we would have to sacrifice to even get up to like 15% of our output being
Right.
manufacturing would be just ridiculous. There's just no, we're actually a net exporter of services, which is something that you never hear the Trumps of the world say.
Mm.
So if we're a net exporter of services, does that mean we're screwing everybody else over? Because it's like the river, it's like a surplus in service revenue, you know.
Right.
We have a different kind of economy. It's just this it's a complete misunderstanding and misreading of the past few decades of economic development. You know, the most wealthy, most prosperous period in human history has been the period after World War II, when trade barriers were torn down around the world, not erected. So it's just this. I think we should leave the listeners with a positive development, though, and that's that I think Trump's idiotic approach to tariffs and his horrible implementation of tariffs is actually driving people toward free trade.
Mm.
It's like you'll actually sometimes see people associated with the administration say maybe we'll just have a free trade pact with the EU or whatever, and then the EU is making noises to that effect. And it's kind of like, so what do you actually want? Do you want tariffs or do you want free trade? What is the matter with you? Do you have any principles?
Right.
But anyway, I actually saw, I think it was Gallup. There was some Gallup polling on whether the costs of free trade outweigh the benefits.
Mm.
And it was unbelievable how much support for free trade has surged just in recent
Mm.
months. Like it was overwhelming because Americans have been suspicious of free trade for a long time, and for understandable reasons. Like there are costs that you do lose certain jobs, you reshuffle the economy for sure. Um, so anyway, it's as with many things Trump, if we can just survive his administration, which we can,
Yeah.
then it sort of like restates these first principles. Why did we care about free trade? Why did we care about a liberal international order? Why does NATO matter? Why do our democratic institutions matter? If people are forced to ask these questions and answer them again, and
Mm.
then we won't be so decadent. We won't be so complacent about our system, and then maybe we can build something stronger. So,
All right. Well, that's awesome. Matt Johnson, it's been really good talking to you on the Falsifiable podcast. I'm your host, Eric Denton, and we will see you next time.